Okay, thank you. Right, everyone, welcome back. Workshop session. We've got a couple of workshops here. Central government reforms first up, and then we're looking at our draft climate change strategy and economic wellbeing strategy. So straight away, over to you, Katie, for the central government reforms.
Thank you very much. So we've got two things to cover with you today. One is the draft submission on the resource management reforms. The draft submission's been pre-circulated to you. The reason that we are seeking feedback today is that the submissions are due by the 13th of February, and that's obviously before we have any further meetings. So what we would like to do today is be able to get some feedback on the draft and then be able to be in a position to submit under delegated authority by the Chief Executive as is standard practice in this sort of situation, and we would then bring you a copy of the submission that's been submitted at the next opportunity, which would be at the next SPNP meeting on the 18th of February, that's right. So to develop the draft submission, staff have been talking to colleagues around our region, as well as up and down the country. There's obviously a lot of interest in the resource management reforms. It's a big change since 1991. But what we have done, and we've also been speaking to our iwi partners around the region as well. What we have done is know that there are a number of professional groups and others who are making very, very extensive submissions, as you would expect on such a significant change in legislation. And so staff are taking part in those sort of professional groups as they would expect up and down the country, but we've really restricted the draft submission to points that are really of particular relevance to Waipa, rather than trying to replicate something around every clause in both bits of legislation, which would just be an enormous task. So that felt like the most efficient use of our time and expertise as staff. And so that's what you've got in front of you, is those matters which we see as being of particular relevance to Waipa. I think we've got that sort of time to really then see if there are things that you are uncomfortable with or any additional points that you would have expected to see, and to see if we've actually kind of got the tenor about right, and we'll obviously take that away with us and amend the submission, and we'll continue to do that in particular as we keep talking to our iwi partners who are really keen that we strongly support protecting the treaty settlement legislative requirements in our region, which is one of our very special requirements that we have here in Waipa. So I'm really happy to take questions about the draft submission and the kind of overall approach as well.
Yeah, far away.
Yeah, thanks. The submission that's there at the moment looks good to me. I have more questions though around what I see as the weaknesses in environmental protections that are really, I suppose, exposed, given, the change between the systems, and then the transitional provisions. And yeah, I'm just not feeling very comfortable about those, that I think there's a lot of vulnerabilities. Yeah. I don't know if it needs strengthening what you've got there, but could you comment a bit more about that, or whether or not you think it's, I suppose, an adequate framework that they're putting in place, given those two, important aspects that look like they're really, really weakened?
Yeah, absolutely. So to your first point about the environmental protections, we didn't cover that. The way we've read the Natural Environment Bill is that will mostly be regional council or regional purpose, and felt that it was outside of our current remit, so just didn't comment on it at all. We've picked up on some concerns in terms of timings regarding the one combined regional plan, and the fact that there's contention between the environmental outcomes and the land use or development outcomes, based in terms of timings and also what happens if there's conflict. So we've pointed it out, and certainly know that other submissions go into great detail around it. To your second point, which I've already forgotten, which transition, sorry. Yeah, we've highlighted just some key points. We again didn't do a clause by clause. There were quite a few things we could have said if it was a clause by clause. And I know that Taitoa, for example, goes very heavily into that because obviously everyone wants to make sure that that transition period is not confusing for anyone. We need to be spending time and resources on working into the new system, not dealing with how we deal with in the middle.
I'm just getting back to the environmental thing. So it says that there's going to be a national environmental regulator that's going to look after the monitoring and enforcement. So I just have misgivings as to how effective that might be, just because I've, you know, as in a role as an elected member over the last 10 or something years, it's been highlighted how difficult it is even to monitor and enforce on a local level. Yeah, so have you got any comments on, a national model for that kind of function?
I think this actually really plays back into a discussion overall around across the whole system, what function should sit at a central, a regional and a local sort of level. And I think that that's something that we should keep exploring as part of the simplifying local government work. And I think that, you know, that's a really good thing to be calling out. You want to comment further, Steph?
The Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment Office is spending a lot of time thinking about setting regulation, monitoring, compliance and enforcement, and where the respective roles sit. And, you know, right through to the role of the regional council and local councils at the moment, potentially those functions could still be delivered locally, but led out of central government, for example. So there is a conversation about where that best sits, and could some of them be more informed and be more consistent if they were nationally driven, but regionally or locally based. So it's the idea of what's most effective in terms of the function, and therefore where does it sit, and where does the expertise and who funds it, where does it sit? But you're right, those regimes are challenging, and interested in your feedback about where you think they sit, and that they could be most effective.
Well, could we sort of have something in the submission to say that, you know, we can see this coming, and that care needs to be made in calibrating it so that those separate functions, whether it's monitoring, compliance, enforcement, or whatever, you know, are delivered at the right, I suppose, at the right level or the right place, yeah, so that it's most effective. And at the moment, it's not that clear. I don't know, or I guess you could say you're open to who's, I suppose, responsible for it, but then the delivery might be different to that responsibility. But I also agree on it needs to be very clear who's going to fund it. I'm hoping it's going to be the consent holder, but unlikely to be, I think, because there'll be fewer consents. Yeah. So if something could be woven into the draft submission on that, yeah, I think that would be a good move. Yeah, thanks.
Roger.
Yeah, we've certainly got some meaty stuff today, haven't we? Which is great. I've got a couple of questions here, if I may. The legislation talks about quality functioning rural towns, and the note says that this should be further defined. I think there's an advantage there that if Cambridge and TA were both redefined as quality rural towns rather than tier 1 add-ons to Hamilton city growth and having the same criteria applying, can we make a point of that and say that there is a distinction between the function and the character of quality rural towns rather than just being seen as a tier 1 growth? Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I guess, why this particular topic was introduced. It's one of the key goals of the planning bill. So the goals essentially set out everything, that all the detail we don't yet know, all the national direction must achieve that. But what is that? So for us here in Waipa, that's really specific, and that's kind of some of the message or the picture we're trying to paint in the start of the submission, that we aren't just a commuter town to Hamilton, we have our own
Yep.
character. So we want to be a well-functioning urban and rural space, but within a context that suits and is appropriate to Waipa.
Yeah. The other note that I made was there's obviously comment about having clear, let me just move my note, clear, integrated, comprehensive national policy direction. And that goes really without saying. But what actually follows on for that is there is really a need for a clear and unambiguous hierarchy of policy statements across national, regional, and local government. And I think one of the challenges that I see that we're going to have is that clear and unambiguity is going to occur because the national legislation is going to become more enabling and will actually possibly put out of kilter some of our local district plan legislation, which isn't going to be as enabling. How are we going to get that system that's consistent in terms of its enablement across all of the three? I just think there's going to be some conflict, because if we're going to have to do a district plan review, I know that we've got one planned, but we're going to have to wait for this before we go in, and then it's going to become pretty much a rewrite of the whole plan, which ain't going to happen overnight. So how long is it going to be before we get a system that's going to be clear?
The district plan won't exist. So this framework that they're putting forward is very clear in terms of hierarchy. If we consider a invert triangle of national direction being very, very specific, very standardized, and sending very clear messages of what can be included in the combined regional plan, being the spatial chapter, which has very short time frames to achieve, the one chapter on the natural environment plan, and then an individual land use plan for each district. That will effectively replace our district plan, but that will be standardized. There is an ability within the proposed bills to include bespoke provisions, which is where we would have to provide a lot of extra work to justify, but where we can, so we could do for the likes of St. Peter's, Mystery Creek, that would be our ability to achieve that.
Okay.
But again, that will also be compared back to standardized permitted activities, so that consenting will be for very small amount. So that's at the bottom of the triangle and less work. But there isn't anything within the proposal in terms of when there's conflicts. So there's likely, well, that's not negative of me, there potentially could be conflicts between national directions set in the different topics that they're intending. So there's a lot of detail not yet known.
So the follow-on of what you're saying there then is the disappearance of pretty much 95% of the consenting function that we currently hold as a local authority.
Through the chair, I can't remember the percentage, but it's a.
Oh, no, sorry, I just pulled that off the top of my head.
Just to pick up on that point, I know that in what we've seen in press releases from the minister, then he's suggesting that consents around the country would be halved, is the sort of order of magnitude that he's been using. But we haven't. We can't say at a district scale what it would look like yet here. But I think to come back to the point you were making around the relationship, this is something absolutely about the timing at which all of these things come to pass. And I think it's something, again, we've discussed this earlier in relation to simplifying local government, that there is something that perhaps we need to, on the basis of that discussion, just amplify in the submission here around the timeframes and the fact that some of this work needs to be done before we end up with the national direction. And then what do you do again? And you know, because we just can't afford the time or the cost of rework, and nor can you afford to wait another decade before you sort of catch up again. So there is something about making sure that there is actually just much better alignment in the timeframes about when these needs to happen.
Because that centralised consenting agency has already been established, hasn't it?
What centralised agency are you referring to, sorry?
For consents?
So they're not looking to do that. So it will still be within the district for consenting, and then under the natural environment standard bill, will be permits, is a different language, but that will still be done at the localised level.
Right, good.
Hey, Wendy, you referred to a territorial land use plan, I think you called it. What's going to be in that when you've already got a regional spatial plan?
So the regional spatial plan essentially will be looking at where do we want to grow, where do we want to provide infrastructure, where do we want to achieve protection, that kind of spatial level. And then the land use plan will be effectively a district plan. So here's your zones, but it's standardised. Here's all the things that permitted. We'll have a raft of zoning options that we can select. So that's why each district can be different, but there won't be too much option.
I've got one last question, and you've actually expanded this question because you're saying that our district plan will actually disappear. What control will we have then on the character and nature of our communities? We've now got the vehicle in which we can establish character areas, but that's in the district plan. So where will then we now have the power to control that?
I've taken the microphone only because, I mean, Wendy can answer that, particularly the first part of this better than I can, but that is still, like you say, essentially that chapter is the district plan. So the same sorts of considerations can be made in that chapter. But this absolutely then is about the interplay between the resource management reforms and what happens beyond. And so by the time this is in place, we end up with a spatial plan that the bill recommends is developed with the mayors of the region and the regional council, potentially with others at the table. But then it plays into what might the future of local government be in the region, about who the governance body would be, who would oversee a regional spatial plan, and therefore the chapters within it. And so this interplay is extremely important for us to keep working through.
And I guess through the chair, I can comment briefly on your point about local ideas and wanting to protect. And it's essentially that what they're saying is that standardisation using those zones which they've told, that'll be a really easy process. If you want to do anything bespoke, they've outlined the process, and it's a lot more complicated, a lot more justification, a lot more information and time, essentially. So they're trying to not encourage people, but they do have it as an avenue.
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
If there aren't any other further questions, we might round it off for there. Yeah, thank you. It's been good to hear the areas of particular interest and concern. So we'll make sure that we reflect them back into the draft submission, and that will go out before the 13th under delegated authority. And we will bring, like I say, we'll bring back the submission for your information back to the next SPMP meeting on the 18th. But just like to thank Wendy and the team for the work that they've done putting the draft submission together, and the work that we continue to do, kind of just liaising with others, so we just really understand what the view is around the country. So we might just quickly move to development levies, and then and again the approach here is that the guidance that we're asking is sort of like a plan for a plan today. Tony is sitting on the National Working Group for moving to development levies from development contributions. And without putting words in his mouth, given these right here, Tony is suggesting that that process is going very well. It's a group that's been put together and actually is being able to work well with the Department of Internal Affairs officials, and so is a very effective way of making sure that the system is going to be practical and actually an improvement from what we've got now. Our suggested approach is that given the technical nature of this, there's no value in preparing a separate Waipa specific submission, because there aren't any situations which are really Waipa specific, and that actually, as long as you get to see the final National Working Group submission so you understand what's in it, that we would then be asking that you support that submission so that we lend our voice to the work that Tony's doing as part of that National Working Group. Yep.
Yeah, so I don't have a problem with Tony being on the National Working Party and things like that. That's fine. A weakness of this approach, of course, is that it's going to give a totally council-focused or staff-focused viewpoint. And I'm concerned, what about the property owners? Okay, who's going to be speaking up for them? Because my understanding is that there'll be the ability to impose levies or targeted rates quite easily, you know, to as a way of these developer levies, because it's not just about the developer, it's about the future funding of it as well, which I understand to be targeted rates. And so who's going to be looking after the interests of those future residents? Yeah, it's a power thing, and it's also, I suppose, safeguarding those people that we want to move into our district in the future, but may be discouraged from because of these levies or targeted rates, and they will choose to go somewhere else. Yeah, because you know they don't have any control over the magnitude of them. They often can be increased unilaterally. And yeah, so I was involved in some of the report. Well, I read the reports about Millbrook in Auckland, and generally what I heard from residents there was that people wouldn't buy those properties to live in themselves. They'd just be for rentals. You know, like it has an impact on the makeup of our community. Yeah, and so I don't mind the work that Tony's doing. It's important for council's interests to be looked after, but where in the process is the end user, or you know, the property owner as well? How's their voice being heard?
I suppose that the focus of the Development Contributions Working Group executive team is to focus specifically on the levy provisions. And at this point, there's no voice other than through the LTP process to, thank you, to really set rates outside of that LTP process, which will still be informed. So when development levies come into place, it will just replace the mechanism which the levies are set versus what development contributions are. So levies won't be a target that goes post the developer charge. It will be a charge that gets set at the consent stage, similar to the approach that contributions are now. With regards to the additional IFF levy provisions, that's not something that we're suggesting is submitted on independently. A lot of what we've already pitched through our through the past 2 years when we did our working through option analysis of alternative funding, that was already in coordination with CIP, Crown Infrastructure Partners, and a lot of through the feedback that we've already given them through James Bishop was one of the leads in there. You can already see some of the provisions and principles through that coordination is already fed into the actual what the policies provisions are. So that's around exclusion and identifying what was already paid by developers prior to setting up a levy. So that reduces that risk of that double dip that's in there. And if we were to ever enter into that arrangement, that would still require a formal notification. And in any case of how a future resident may be applied by there, it is making sure they're aware of the costs associated with wherever you go. Milford was a bit of a unique one. That was the initial one that really kicked off IFF, and that is not necessarily seen as a great success story that it was once pitched as. So now, since we've gone through from Milford and have this policy provision and the revisions through what we've already communicated through, there should be clear understanding for a potential buyer what they're actually buying into and what they're up for the costs. So that's more regards to the IFF levy, and I know it's confusing with development levies sitting in there, but that levy is to apply directly to the development community. They will likely do a large submission on themselves, probably opposing what's coming through, as it will mean more certainty for councils receiving revenue than what they are used to. And instead of us acting as the bank where they can not hold it for us, we'll be able to charge some interim interest as a result of that. So that gives some more options. And so just further to that development levy working group as well, what we've been working with DIA is around, since the initial announcement, roughly 12 hours of workshops going through line by line with the policy provisions to try and put forward the best case for what council will be and therefore the future ratepayer of returning this revenue back to us as quickly as possible. And that's the same boat for any of the exec members. We're all trying to reduce our debt headroom and reduce our debt on our books, which will only benefit the ratepayer.
Yeah, Roger.
Thanks, Tony. Now then, the first little note that I've got here was, could you explain to me simply what the difference is between casual nexus funding and community nexus funding?
So it's meant to be causal nexus. So it's regarding how currently we have 22 funding areas that will then be chiseled down to 2 funding areas. So essentially, instead of having a C1 growth cell with a very specific project relating to stormwater that gets divvied out by that growth cell, now it will be Cambridge paying for the aggregate charge. And that community boundary needs to be set by national standards of who's actually paying for that. So you won't have a specific, you'll have a specific project relating to a growth cell, but the people that will charge against that will be the community of growth as a whole.
So that is working a little bit away from our growth paying for growth, because currently the costs that were related to our growth principle were the benefactors inherently of that growth cell, C1, C2, but now you're saying we're moving away from that and it will be more a charge on the whole community.
The community that develops in that funding area. So the subdivider that subdivides somewhere within Cambridge will be paying the costs aggregated against the units of demand. The units of demand will be all of Cambridge, not the ratepayer. The future lot that gets defined will be charged
So
a lot.
We'll still have a distinct definition of benefactor.
Correct. Yeah.
Right.
And demand generator. Yep.
And so does this new system, previously in terms of our previous development contributions, there was an opportunity to allocate within the DCs an historic cost that was for the benefit of the whole community. As an example, we had the refurbishment of the CBD was a component of new DCs. Does that still apply under this new system?
So the new system will have a regulator that can define what projects are in scope for charging and what aren't, but you can charge historical costs that already align to your previous DCs. So anything that's currently in your DCs is set as a prescription that can be on-charged, and then it will set how the parameters and guardrails of how you can assign a growth share to a development levy, say to a community infrastructure project or a transport project that has a percentage of growth. So a new library, it will set parameters around how much you can charge to growth and what you've got to assign and prove to the regulator that you are charging for growth.
Okay. And can you still make a difference between greenfield and brownfield developments?
No, you can't. Well, not under the general base levy. There is provision within the policy to have a high level overlay for a specific area. But high level overlays are only whether or not you can see economic efficiency in administering a high levy overlay. Are you restricting a development by putting this on, or you're encouraging it to develop over and above what you expect it to? Or is the amount that would be a high level overlay versus the previous such indiscriminate around how much growth is going there that there's no economic benefit to actually ensure one's within. So that's what we've been debating through with DIA, and it's taken a lot of that 12 hours, is around why would you go through a system that is trying to aggregate charges only to apply a high level overlay, which is another point that a developer can try and nitpick to bend the rules in their favour. So that's part of our submission processes. The intent is to simplify the charging. This complicates it.
Okay, thanks, Tony. Hey, Katie, we could spend all day on these technical details. Where do you want to take us on this? You're not looking for guidance, particularly on the development levies, are you?
So no, I guess if you want to be making a council submission and it wants to have content, then we will need to work that up for you, because we will need to bring it to you and seek approval for a submission on the 18th of Feb. If you don't want us to do that, then we will keep putting our energies into this DIA National Working Group, which I still recommend is the highest value use of time, and that's the steer we need from you today. And what I'm picking up is that there are a number of really good questions. They are being picked up here, and that's the sort of thing we should just carry on, through this National Working Group. And we will bring you a one-page submission that says we endorse the National Working Party Group submission, and we will attach that so that you've seen it and actually know what you're endorsing on the day, and that's what we will put to you on the 18th.
Okay, that works for me. If people have contrary views, make yourselves known. For me, it's a great comfort that Tony Cootes is on that working group. I love it, and I know you'll be looking after our interests.
Yeah, I support that as well. I spent some time trying to understand this and sort of roll it around in my head. If you were to answer this can you answer this in 2 sentences? Why will this make things better for us as a council, and will it make things better for our residents?
It will make things better for council regarding the certainty of funding and the liability being pushed back to developers rather than sitting on council. Through the certainty of funding, that will only benefit the residents in terms of the external risk that's normally applied to growth. Correct, yep.
Okay. Katie, are we at the end of this, or are we still going?
Fortunately for you, yes, we are. You do have one more agenda item, which
no, I realise that.
yeah, which we have run over for.
Encroaching
So
upon.
apologies to you all for that.
Okay, thank you. Look forward to seeing what you come up with. All good. Keep us posted. Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah. Sorry, I missed something.
Sorry, just before, I just want to acknowledge Katie and Wendy for this submission, and Haven for what he's about to do. But in the background is this amazing woman, Karen Saunders, who we've got on board, who's actually managing the whole program of all the reforms. So she, along with Katie and Kirsty, are corralling everyone across the organisation who is feeding in, and it's a large group of people feeding into these reforms. So Karen, I just want to acknowledge you and introduce you to the councillors and vice versa, and thank you for your work. Yeah, thanks Tony, thanks Wendy.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Okay. Haven and Joy, you're going to double team this, climate change and economic
I think
well-being
we're actually triple
strategy.
teaming because Lisa's coming in too.
Okay, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. And Kirsty. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, councillors. For those of you who haven't met me before, I'm Joy Mickelson. I'm the Economic Development Advisor. You do know Haven, and you do know Lisa, and you do know Kirsty. You will have received some prior reading ahead of the session and the draft strategy documents and the draft summaries and feedback forms that are going to be used in the engagement process. And if we can click forward, the purpose of the workshop is on the slide there. Between the four of us, we're going to take you through that today. First of all, just a quick scene setter showing where these two strategies fit into our strategic framework. Our vision, building connected communities, is our North Star, and our community outcomes outline where we want to focus our efforts. Ahuaki, the Waipa Community Spatial Plan, was adopted in March 2025, and it's the blueprint for shaping our future, and it's one of our organisational priorities. The adoption of a climate change and economic wellbeing strategy are two of the three key deliverables in this year's Ahuaki Community Spatial Plan Implementation Plan. And I'm going to pass you over now to Haven.
Thanks, Joy. So I'm just going to give a high-level overview of the climate change strategy, some of the key thinking behind it, and the process to date. So we're developing the strategy because we know climate change is already affecting Waipa, and it will increasingly shape how we need to plan, invest, and deliver our services. I'm sure we'll all be very aware of the recent tragic events that have affected much of the country. And I'm sure we also have those communities front of mind at the moment. And fortunately, Waipa did manage to bypass some of those more dramatic impacts. But I thought it was just worth keeping in mind that we have had some of our own local impacts. So just for quick examples, you may be aware that we had some pretty bad road melt events at the start of the summer that needed emergency repairs to keep things moving. We've got 2 current algal blooms in Lake Naroto and Lake Arapuni with public health warnings. We've got some pretty major stability issues along tracks near the Waikato River. And then, having talked to the parks team recently, just a less obvious sort of issue that we're dealing with is we've got quite an extended wet period that's been going on this summer, and that's caused essentially an extended spring to be happening. So our mowing operators have been out there a lot longer than they normally would have, but it flows through because they often jump on and help the parks team and do some mulching. Then that work has had to be thought about and not actioned as quick as it normally would. And we're getting a few more weeds that we'll need to think about going forward, which would potentially become fire risks later on in the summer. So there's all those reasons happening to think about the strategy, as well as 2 key documents that have said that we should generate a climate change strategy. The first one through the Climate Change Governance Improvement Plan, which was informed by a KPMG audit, and then our community also requesting that we develop this strategy through Ahuaki. That last bullet point there is just noting some of the higher level, I guess, philosophy or thinking that we've put into this building the strategy over the last 18 months. Essentially we're trying to come at it from a Waipa perspective. We know that there's other bigger cities that have different resources that may be able to think about addressing climate change in their own ways. They might have higher proportion of people living in smaller areas, and they have different tools to address it with public transport options. But we know that Waipa is a rural, productive land base, and we face our own set of issues. So that's what we've tried to bring through in the strategy that you've been circulated. All right, I will just flip through to the next slide with a little bit more detail on how we got here. As I mentioned, we've been working on it for about 18 months, primarily through the governance oversight of the previous Sustainability and Climate Change Subcommittee, with a few brief updates, I think, to this committee and the previous triennium as well. Early on, when we were building this strategy, the elected members were clear that we wanted it to be focused on just climate change and not stray too broadly into wider sustainability issues that can get picked up through the management of our other processes. We want it to be really practical, tangible, and I guess not super aspirational to the point where it becomes unachievable, was some of the thinking. So we want it to stay within the sphere of what we can actually control. And noting that we do have a few councillors who were part of that committee previously who might be able to pick up some of the points I'm making potentially in the discussion as well. This just is the timeframe that we worked to from July through to September in 2024. The 3 workshops we had, there were a few other processes with emails and circulating documents for review amongst that as well. Then in September last year, the Sustainability and Climate Change Committee did endorse the strategy and provided a recommendation for the future council to approve it for a public engagement process. And we're aiming to adopt it by June this year. Okay, this slide's just noting in a bit more detail about what the climate change strategy does. It just provides a 10-year view of what we're looking to do, all the actions that are already in our existing work programs. The focus areas, which essentially relate to the goals in the strategy, are around understanding and sharing climate risks, building resilience into our own services that we deliver and our assets that we build and manage, looking for ways that we could potentially collaborate with the community on adaptation and reducing council's own emissions, not focusing on reducing the district emissions, just what we can handle in-house ourselves. And just that last bullet point, noting that some of the thinking aligns with our anchor institution framework, which we do have up there on the slide. So Waipa, as an anchor institution, we are one of the larger, more stable organisations in the district, and that does give us some influence and an ability to provide leadership, set examples, and coordinate and plan on community scale work and initiatives. So having a climate change strategy would give us a really good platform to reach out and work with other anchors like schools, iwi, health providers and businesses and say, this is the document that says what we're doing, what's your thinking in this space, how can we work together? So just noting that. And I thought it would be good just to confirm what the climate change strategy doesn't do, and it doesn't commit council to funding any new projects. It doesn't introduce any policy or rules. It doesn't replace our existing budgeting process or override any activity management planning. And it, like I mentioned before, it doesn't go wider into general sustainability. So it's a bit of a whirlwind of the climate change strategy, just to bring you up to speed, and I'll hand you back to Joy.
Thanks, Haven. So kind of like Haven, I'll sort of take you back and bring you forward. So working on developing this draft strategy has been underway since 2021, and it started with my predecessor. There have been delays. Priority was given to the development of Ahuaki, the Waipa Community Spatial Plan. We had an enhanced annual plan, another LTP, and also giving regard to the timing of both the central and local government election processes. So there's been a lot on. So we are pleased to be at this point today with this proposal to combine the engagement process for the two strategies. We acknowledge there's a lot on the community's plate, and we believe that by taking this approach, we will reduce consultation fatigue, we'll achieve operational savings, and we'll deliver a targeted campaign that will spur public engagement. Development of Ahuaki enabled valuable community feedback to be gathered, especially during this second phase of that engagement, where economic wellbeing was a specific theme. And feedback from that engagement has been incorporated into the draft strategy and implementation plan that you've now all seen. I just want to focus a wee bit on the difference between economic wellbeing versus economic development. Wellbeing is all-encompassing, and it includes our people, our culture, and our environment as key parts to a thriving economy. Recognising that economic wellbeing relates to everything and everyone and includes access, equity, social support, income, housing, education, medical care, employment, and community education. Economic development focuses on business development, investment, and attraction. They're all important to a well economy, but they are not the only aspects that bring success. In April last year, the draft documents were approved for public engagement by this committee under the previous training. So the economic wellbeing strategy focuses on three main themes: high quality employment growth in urban areas. We know our urban centres are growing at a fast rate. We're seeing that with our own eyes, and the latest census data has confirmed it. COVID brought people back to Waipa in droves, and they've rediscovered what a great community we have here. These new members of our community have different employment needs. These not just new businesses, but new ways of doing business, matching the fast-paced change of technology and digital innovation. So we need to make sure we're keeping up with what's needed and respond to it in a way that the community can afford. Rural economic growth. Now, we've got big pressures here. The tension between urban encroachment against the need to keep land for food production, the impacts of climate change, reducing carbon emissions, changing land use practices. We've all seen dairy land being replaced by new kiwi fruit farms, berry orchards, that type of thing. Agriculture, forestry and farming are our biggest industry sector by GDP for Waipa, but construction and manufacturing are right on their tail. So how do we support agriculture, farming and forestry? Tourism, destinations and culture-based foundations, another growth sector for Waipa, and one that incorporates many aspects of the Māori economy: culture, history, hospitality and ecotourism. What is our council's role in this space? How can we leverage everything our community and district has to offer? There's an increasing awareness of the growing impact of the Māori economy, worth over $70 billion nationally in 2024 and forecast to reach $100 billion by 2030. Iwi within the Waikato are largely post-settlement, with established governance, a growing asset base worth more than $21 billion in 2023, and resourcing and long-term development strategies in place. They are actively progressing their own aspirations and priorities. But what is the Māori economy? There's lots of definitions, but it's generally accepted to include Māori as employees and employers, Māori-run businesses, and those assets associated with iwi, collectives, trusts and corporations. Assets like whenua, housing, commercial and industrial centres, farms, forestry, orchards and fisheries, large community organisations and big corporates. And it's about leveraging those assets to maximise the opportunities to improve education, housing, health and wellbeing for Māori. The Deloitte Top 200 Awards recognise and celebrate outstanding individual and management team performances among New Zealand's largest companies and trading organisations. In 2025, the top 10 Māori Business Index recorded Waikato Tainui in the #1 spot. Raukawa moved up a spot to #9, and they were followed closely by Te Nihi Nui, who entered the top 10 for the first time. 3 here in Waipa. It's outstanding. It's an economy that's strongly based on values, where the value of the asset holding lies more in the ability to generate higher incomes, more jobs and better outcomes and improved wellbeing, as opposed to just chasing the dollar. Our economic wellbeing strategy, our draft, shows a strong alignment with those values. At the first Māori Economic Summit held in Hamilton in November last year, attendees identified several key priorities as important kaupapa to focus on moving forward. These priorities included mental health, capability building through education, business and employment, and housing. So Māori are strongly, I guess that's a great example of how they're embracing the whole concept of economic wellbeing. Changes in our population demographics indicated in the latest sentence evidence a younger, faster growing Māori population, which when combined with this fast growing Māori economy, make it doubly important that through this draft economic wellbeing strategy, Waipa also supports it. The timeframe, very similar to Havens. It shows you how we got to where we are today and is in alignment with where we're moving to in the future with the climate change strategy. Before I hand over to Lisa, I just want to highlight the interdependencies between the two strategies and why it is good or we believe from a staff perspective, it is good that we go out with a combined public engagement approach. Firstly, highlights the strong interdependencies between the two strategies, which are reflected in the implementation plans of each. Waipa is fortunate in having a diverse industry demographic. 52% of our GDP is shared amongst the top 5 industry sectors fairly evenly. This prevents us from suffering severe economical ups and downs when one industry is affected. We've got more of a shallow wave rather than a heart attack when something hits one particular industry. But climate change, regardless, impacts all of these industries equally, and hence that strong interdependency. And so, Lisa, I will hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Joy. And I'm a bit like a fish out of water, not because of climate change, but because Amber's been working on this project, but unfortunately she had an appointment and couldn't be here with us this afternoon. So there's actually 3 slides on communication and engagement. I'm going to whiz through them because it is pretty much a standard mixed approach to how we will tackle this engagement. As Haven and Joy have both referred to, I don't think we've ever had such a burning platform in terms of talking about these 2 topics with the community. You know, for example, while Waipa hasn't been deeply affected by the severe weather events as other parts of the country, we've certainly had slips, and we're certainly feeling the financial implications of how we've had to respond to some of our roaming network. So the approach is that following the approval of the draft climate change strategy and engagement documents at the 18th February meeting at SPMP, that the draft economic wellbeing strategy and supporting documents and the climate change strategy will be available to the public, and the feedback will be reviewed and considered by staff with updates incorporated into the final strategies. This isn't a special consultative procedure, as some of our consultations are. This is engagement, and there's no legislative requirement to consult on them, but we feel as though they are of such importance that it is good to have community feedback, but there will be no formal hearings. It gives effect to the Ahuaki implementation plan, and we know that a number of our community members were involved in the development of that plan, and it's always good to go back and test our ideas and theories as we're putting that plan into practice. Our engagement approach is deliberately flexible. Sorry, moving on. Deliberately flexible so we can tailor how we engage based on the level of interest. And that's probably something that we've never really done before. We've done a one size fits all, but obviously there are things that sit within these strategies that will be of more interest to some than to others. So we really want to play on those strengths. For example, mana whenua and iwi partners who will engage directly and early, working closely with Nera and Erin, rather than applying that one size fits all approach. And we'll take guidance from our iwi partners on the most appropriate channels and formats, whether that be hui, regular kōrero, or other agreed ways of getting some feedback and working with them. We see this as an ongoing relationship across the life of the strategies. I suppose any good strategy is a living document and evolves over time. So we expect that the conversations around the draft strategies will just be the start of a very long-standing relationship working with these interested parties and groups and the community. And you'll be invited to participate in these opportunities as well. Similarly, for stakeholder groups with a high and specific interest, such as the Chambers of Commerce for the Economic Wellbeing Strategy, or organisations like the National Wetland Trust for the Climate Change Strategy, we will use targeted methods that reflect the expertise and interest. And this will help us ensure that engagement is proportionate, meaningful, and focused on improving the quality of feedback that we receive. I'm not very good at talking and clicking at the same time, so please forgive me for that.
Thanks, Lisa. I will just close out with the next steps, because for the draft climate change strategy, I'd be looking to bring a report to the 18th Feb. SPMP meeting seeking formal approval to go on public engagement, which we looked to undertake in March. And then we would do feedback and analysis and incorporate any changes into the strategies, report that back to councillors and bring a formal report to a June 2026 SPMP meeting.
That's right. Okay. Thanks, team. That satisfied all my questions, that next steps. So we can throw open for other questions now from the floor on either of these strategies. Noting one has been approved and one is to be approved, so they're slightly different, but that's where we're at.
To clarify that, so just to clarify that the former Sustainability and Climate Change Subcommittee that Mike Monty chaired did actually provide approval to refer the draft strategy through to the new council to determine engagement. So there was support from that subcommittee. I just wanted to provide that clarification. Thank you.
Yeah, these are more comments rather than questions. I was part of the subcommittee that worked on it and on the climate change strategy, and I'm really pleased with the final form. I have yeah, it's tricky. I have sent through a few minor comments, but it doesn't detract, I think, from the overall quality, I think, of the strategy. And I really liked, we decided to have those principles at the beginning, which sort of set out the whole way that we want to approach it, which I think sets the tone. So I just wanted to sort of generally endorse what I see there. I'm interested whether or not this will be a standalone consultation engagement, or if it's going to run in parallel, perhaps with other consultation you might have planned. You're not going to have anything concurrent with it?
Not at this point in time, no.
Yeah.
The only,
Okay.
the only other consultation that we have running concurrently will be Cambridge Connections.
No, it'd be interesting to see how it goes. And I'm quite excited actually about the economic wellbeing strategy. I feel it's a different approach than what we've taken in the past. It'll be really interesting to see what feedback we get, things like that. Yeah, and really keen, like you said, on the slide, that you want EMs to be involved and encourage participation. And I see like the rural economic strategy would definitely be part of the Pirongi Award theme of that kind of things there. So really interested to see how we could work positively on that. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thanks, team. It's been really useful bringing the new council up to speed on these two strategies. Look forward to it coming back to SPMP, the climate change one, and then seeing how these consultations go. So I'm going to wrap it up there. It's been a really long day. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. Shane, do you have a final question, comment?
Yeah, I just thought we should have actually broken it up to talking about climate change and then the economic wellbeing strategy as two separate items. But I just have a question about the graph on page 98, I think it is. And I see that every year our carbon has gone up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years in a row, and then in FY26 it's gone down. So I just want to try to understand that, and it may be having to do with wastewater treatment or something by the looks of it. So I just want confirmation of that. And then the fact that we had 7 years in a row where it went up, and now suddenly we're saying that we're going to have the next 5 years it's going to go down, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So can you just explain why it's gone down in 26, and then why do you think that for the next 5 years it will go anti the trend that we've had for the last 7 years?
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. Yes, that's spot on that the wastewater treatment plant is causing that big drop off in 26.
Yeah.
This graph has been updated previously, whether FY25 5-year, what used to be a projected year, and that was also one that was going down. So it's an ongoing issue where the projections aren't quite lining up with what we're seeing after the measurement. We get these done. We've had this generated through professional services who looks at all our energy use. So I think one of the big drivers is, given a lot of the weather issues and how our electricity is generated centrally, that's a pretty big impact on how we consume that electricity as a council. And if the hydro dams aren't functioning the way that they were expecting to, and there are longer droughts or something, and they have to use more fossil fuels to keep our national grid supplying the energy, that's had quite a big impact on us not going down over some of those years. Whether that will continue to be an issue going forward, the people who are pulling this together are assuming that it will be managed, but that's an observation that we have been questioning as well.
Even further to that, these reporting that used to go through the Sustainability and Climate Change Committee that no longer exists, I'm assuming this will be coming through SPMP at a semi-regular basis from now on.
Yes, that's correct.
Great. So Shane, you'll get to see it as it goes.
Okay, sorry, just one other question. In terms carbon offsetting through tree planting, has that been something that's been discussed or considered?
For council's own emissions?
Yeah.
I think we have forestry blocks that are already in forestry. So the only opportunities there would be if we plant up some of our other reserves that aren't already in forestry. It's an idea that has been thought about. We haven't got any specific project to bring it to life currently.
Okay, just a suggestion. Now on to the next subject. Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Which is the economic wellbeing strategy. So, I mean, I have always been disappointed that the process was wrong for putting that together because the chambers weren't involved. Now, you say that they're involved in 2019, 2020, but that's 5 years ago. Life's changed. And it would have been very useful. I'm suspecting that some of the feedback's going to be quite negative because of that. So just bear that in mind. And of course, the other negative feedback will be about tourism, given that Destination Cambridge, Destination Te Awamutu were doing a fine job of, and now they're no longer around. So I think as an anchor institute, we should be thinking more about how those organisations should be working with council, not council to set up their own organisation in terms of tourism, etc. So I'm just giving you that heads up that you're going to get some negative responses from that.
Can I maybe just respond to the point, Shane, that you made about not engaging with the Chambers of Commerce post 2020? So acknowledge that very early work specific to the review of the then economic development strategy was undertaken some years ago. We then focused our efforts on the development of Ahuaki, and that did have within it a dedicated, focused theme work stream relating to the economic development. And so there was engagement through that process, but you're absolutely right. This is an opportunity now to directly engage with those key stakeholders and to hear from them in terms of the further shaping of the strategy. So we take that on board. But just to clarify that there was extensive resourcing and input through the development of Ahuaki that included a focused work stream around the economic development.
Okay, thanks. I want to wrap this up. Sorry, Shane, I didn't see your questions and comments. They were good ones, by the way. I didn't see you before I tried to wrap up the meeting previously, so my apologies. Okay, it's been a long day. Let's wrap it up. Thank you very much, everyone. And can you join me in our closing karakia, please? Puratia, te rangamārie, Puratia, te araha, Puratia, te ngāko pai, Puratia, ngā wawata, kia kore e ngaro, haumia, huie, tākie. Kia ora. Thanks, everyone.